Well, this is David Peritz, and I'd like to spend a few minutes describing with you a new class that I'm going to be teaching on the Minerva Lifelong Learning Platform, the platform that Sophia and I have established. And the class is going to be on Dangerous Politics, Neglected Issues 2024, why we can no longer rely on our institutions to rescue us from our politics. And this class will be meeting the last two Tuesdays in July, and then each Tuesday after that for August. It meets from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time, 10 to 12 Western Time, and then other time zones if you're other places in the world. And I want to suggest that this is probably the most ambitious class of this kind that I've put together. I put this together in the middle of a presidential election, in the aftermath of one of the two candidates having survived an assassination attempt, the other candidate being apparently quite diminished in the way in which he performed in the first debate. The first candidate, Donald Trump, apparently with a plan to substantially increase executive power and to use it in ways that may be hostile to the traditions of liberal democracy that have been slowly but surely improved over the course of American history. The other candidate, Joe Biden, seemingly incapable of really persuading people about the dangers that path represents. And so, with that background, I want to suggest that in 2024, as the subtitle of the course says quite clearly, we cannot rely on our institutions to rescue us from our politics. This was, I think, most abundantly clear in the recent Supreme Court case on presidential immunity, Donald J. Trump versus the United States, aptly named. And in that case, I do not believe the justices of the Supreme Court live in a world in which they could be unaware of so-called Project 2025, this project to vastly expand and to use in much more targeted and political ways executive power. I don't think the justices can be unaware of that. And so they made a decision removing the constraint of potential criminal liability from the presidency at a moment where one of the two main candidates for the presidency is promising to do things that may very well be criminal if he is held to account for them. That's just an example. I think our media, I think our parties, I think our constitution, I think our system of checks and balances, I think our political culture and the norms it sustains, all of them are in a state of accelerating decay. And so they won't protect us. And so what makes this class so ambitious is I want to bring together three questions I've kind of asked independently in different classes like this over the last 10 years. And so one of those questions is, how did our politics become so deranged? A second question is, what are the most urgent policy issues we face, and what policy alternatives are available for addressing those issues? The third question is it possible to improve the practice of democracy in the United States in the 21st century? And I've treated each of those questions separately in different classes. In this class, I want to bring them all together. And I want to do so by suggesting that part of the reason that our politics are so deranged over the last decade is because we have failed to address policy issues that we actually have good approaches for the last 50 years, and that until we improve our democracy, we won't be able to implement policies that would actually restore our politics to sanity. So as you can see, in a sense, I'm suggesting these three questions are really woven together in ways that make it very artificial to separate them, and at the same time, very challenging to address them. And so I'll start this class by talking about the core issue, why our institutions won't rescue us from our politics if we continue to move in the direction of violence, autocracy, authoritarianism in the 2020s. I think that is the direction we will move in. And so can we, the people of the United States, redirect our politics without institutional guardrails to keep us on a safe path? I'll then transition to a number of policy issues. I want to start with economics, and the suggestion here is that we have moved from a society in which most people were secure and had the prospects for prosperity. They thought it was within reach, not for them, maybe for their children. We've moved from that society into a society in which more and more of us are precarious, and in which the idea of prosperity is a receding fantasy. How did that happen? What can we do about it? How can we restore greater equality? How is the drift into greater inequality feeding the grievance, the anger, the mistrust, the anti-institutionalism, the populism of our politics? That's the second lecture. As you can tell, these are ambitious topics. The third lecture will focus on sex and gender, abortion, but also on the Supreme Court and on the effort to reimpose traditional values via legal coercion in the 21st century. And so this is sometimes called Christian nationalism as well. And so I want to ask how we moved from a society that was gradually transitioning in the direction of being less traditional about religion, sex, gender, into a society where we are just completely polarized around these issues, and we seem to have more and more people wanting to use state power to reimpose traditional values, and whether or not we could put ourselves back into a society that seems to offer valuable roles to all of its members without completely constraining them, boxing them in with tradition. The fourth lecture will focus on issues of immigration, race, diversity, and fracture. And so the idea, of course, is that we're on our way to being a multiracial democracy, and yet increasingly large numbers of people seem to feel that this does not allow the level of social cohesion necessary to sustain a sense that we all belong to the same society, that we're all in this together, that we all care for each other, that we have solidarity with each other. And again, there's a historical question. Why have we become so much more diverse, and why has that diversity become so much more relevant to our politics? How is it fracturing us? And then a policy question. What could we do to establish relations of equality among all of these groups, relations of mutual respect to sustain democracy and justice for a multiracial democracy? Fifth week, final substantive policy issue focuses on the fact that many of the forces that seem to be most worrisome, most dangerous in the middle of the 21st century are not domestic but global forces. I've been focusing on the United States so far. It's where I live. It's the country whose politics I care most about. But having said that, I have to recognize whether it's wars in Ukraine or Gaza, or global climate change, or global pandemics, or the loss of biodiversity. We could keep going. Many of the most important challenges that the world, and therefore the United States, which exists in the world, faces in the 21st century can only be solved through global collaboration and cooperation. We require global institutions, and we need to have some sense of agency, some sense that we can solve these problems, even if these problems require the work of societies that differ fundamentally from our society in their values, in their institutions, in their interests. And so, how do we rebuild functional global institutions in what I'm going to call the post Cold War world? So, having said all of that, the final lecture will be how can we make democracy work better in the 21st century? Because coming back to the central theme of this course, we have failed to address some of the most pressing policy issues we face. Because we have failed, more and more of our fellows are increasingly turning against the project of sustaining and slowly improving liberal democracy, and instead flirting with more autocratic, more populist, less liberal alternatives. And so, can we make our institutions work better so that policies are implemented so more people can see that democracy works for them? I know that's an awful lot. I'm getting tired just talking about it, but I promise you, we will have 12 hours together. There will be plenty of opportunity for discussion, and I will do everything in my power to really try to generate some traction on these incredibly difficult but incredibly important problems. I hope you'll consider joining me, and we will get you the details about how to join me, but you can go to the Minerva website, which I think most of you are familiar with and which we will link to this message. Looking forward to seeing many of you very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. And so AI is everywhere. And in many respects, it has been. If you use Google, if you use Amazon, if you use electronic banking or GPS or smartphones for a decade, but now we're starting to use it directly, right? And so, Sophia, you're using it to spell check your copy, and your colleagues are using it to write their first drafts of their medical reports. My colleagues may be using it to grade their papers, et cetera, and so on. And so it's everywhere now. And for people our age, it may be a little bit less obligatory to use, but for my college students, they absolutely have to use it, know how to use it. And so it worries me, given how inept we've been at regulating new technological developments. There's a new report from the American Surgeon General indicating that there's a mental health crisis, especially for girls and young women, that is directly related to social media use, that social media in many ways is akin to tobacco in terms of its addictive nature and its potential side effects. And yet we don't regulate it at all. It worries me with AI, a technology that literally could take control of
I
so.
find your slide very interesting,
Go
and
ahead.
I do agree that AI we may not have lost control of AI, but I do feel that we can't compete with it. However, we can use it with our lives, and it has made my life so much easier just in proofreading and in suggesting edits to what we write.
It's an interesting question, right? Because did humans ever really try to get control of AI? A lot of the questions they're going to be asking today are, did it happen or did we just admit it, right? So I think this is the year that AI exploded as a development thing and a business thing online, and regular people started to understand what AI meant, and not just the ones like me who had been watching science fiction since they were 10 years old and have been dreading this moment their entire lives. So I don't know if we ever had control of it, to be honest. But yes, this is the year in which we started treating AI the same way we treated most other developments online, which just to say, without any sense of what we're doing, without any plan, without any understanding of what's going on. As you know, we went into the era of Google and the rest of them by giving them total legal immunity from everything. And as a result of that, we are suffering the consequences right now. And the question about AI is, is it a toy? Is it amazing? Is it cute? Is it going to be like Google Glass and go away in a year? I don't think so, but we haven't, as certainly our society, I'm not sure what's happening in other countries, but in the United States, there isn't so far any real coherent attempt to figure out how we're going to control this and to declare it a public utility. That's the most important thing that has to happen. In my mind, one of the greatest mistakes we made as a society was deciding that the internet was not a public utility.
I want to start by noting that I think this is something I gather many people have been eager to talk about for a while now. And I've put off talking about it in part because it seemed to me spending some extended time talking about the Supreme Court was important. If you remember, at the conclusion of that Supreme Court series, I asked if we were maybe paying too much attention to the wrong coup. That the slow motion coup that was occurring within the bounds of legality that was being brought about primarily by the Supreme Court in concert with the Republican Party in ways that may make it possible for the Republican Party to stably translate minority support from voters into majority power in federal or national government.